So I'm writing this book on AI, and one of the things that's really important in the evolution of human intelligence is theory of mind. What's in this other guy's mind? Are they trying to eat me? Are they trying to steal? And theory of mind was developed long before there was money or other things. The theory of mind in business is basically business models. What is it they're after? What are they willing to give up to get what they want? Why are they looking at me that way? Why are they ignoring me? Uh, and that all goes to, what are they doing with my data? Why are they showing me these funny movies and not even making me pay anything? Well, it's because they're getting something else instead.
Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm Brian McCullough. In the more than 200 episodes that I've done for this podcast, never has the designation legend been more appropriate. Esther Dyson is a legend of modern technology, having been present for so many of the key moments from the early PC era all the way through today's AI era. She's advised, interviewed, and mentored basically every major tech figure over the last several decades. Enjoy this conversation about the career of Esther Dyson with the legend herself. Esther Dyson, thanks for coming on to talk to us today.
Delighted to be here.
So the great Cindy Stivers put us in touch, and I asked her, like I often do when people make connections, what's the one question that you want me to ask? Make sure that I ask. And her one question was, do you still have the cosmonaut suit which used to hang over your desk at Meetup?
I still do, but it's not hanging over my desk, which is actually my kitchen table. And I have my cosmonaut patch and lots of treasures.
All right, I'm going to use that as a bookmark because we're going to come back at the end to the cosmonaut suit and that whole
Okay,
story.
great. I mean, there's a story about it which is more
Oh,
interesting.
okay.
And
When we get to training for space,
yeah,
I'll bring that up again.
yeah, there's the cosmonaut suit I don't have. That's the more
Oh,
interesting
okay.
one.
All right, putting that in my
They
notes.
wanted a bribe, basically. So
Putting that in my notes. Okay, the other sort of icebreaker question to start with was from me. You're known for the phrase "always make new mistakes." Where did that come from? Did you hear it somewhere, or do you remember the inception of it?
no, I know exactly what it means, but so I don't make a lot of decisions, and things emerge. So I probably thought about it a few times, and then you'll learn from your mistake. Whatever you do, don't make the same mistake again. Make a new mistake. I mean, I think it emerged in that way, but there's not a particular mistake that I remember.
But always do it. Don't be afraid. In fact,
Yeah.
embrace mistakes all the
Well,
time.
what I want to do is update it, obviously, with a chart, and it's, y-axis is learning, x-axis is earning, and in most things, but especially investing. The less you learn, the less you earn, because you make mistakes, the more you learn. And of course, you want to be in the upper right hand corner, but you rarely are. Where you don't want to be is learning nothing and earning nothing.
We're going to get to your investing philosophy as well,
Yeah.
but let's start the chronology here. So,
Okay.
as a lot of people know, you grew up with two very famous, well-respected parents, a world-famous mathematician, world-famous physicist. Obviously, every child has to carve out their own direction in life, but do you feel like there's a unique sort of hurdle or challenge that children of prominent parents have to
Well,
face?
so he wasn't prominent. I mean, eventually, yes, but it wasn't. No, it was. I mean, there was Einstein,
Hmm.
who basically, my father was a physicist, and to be honest, my mother was not world famous,
Mm.
and that's the reality usually of, especially in those times. But she was a good mathematician who then married my father and became a housewife and so forth. So we were on the campus that was run by Robert Oppenheimer. This was after Los Alamos, and Einstein was there, and you know, genuinely world famous people. But yeah, people always ask me, "Did you know Einstein?" And yeah, I met him, but I was more interested in my first grade teacher because she was really important to me. And that was, but it was definitely a very interesting bubble.
Well,
And
certainly though, when you enter the world on your own because your parents are successful, let's put it that way.
yeah,
Um, to carve out, for example, you went to college to study economics. Like, uh, was that a choice that was influenced by your parents, or was it like I'm gonna kind of zag a little bit?
oh, it was totally. There's no way I can. Yeah, I wouldn't want to try and compete with my father or mother in math or physics. And actually, I took them the first year because I thought I knew something and got really bad grades. And then I decided I wanted to do economics because understanding economics was probably a better way to change the world than politics, which sort of was the obvious one. But I thought, no, you really got to understand how it works. And so that's probably some of the scientific influence. But it was more, yeah, I left home at 15. I wanted to go out and see the rest of the world because I knew I lived in a bubble. And I passed as a teenager at college. It was great.
Was there a an Einstein for you from the field of economics? You know, someone that you looked up to or admired?
Well, there was Vasily Leontiev who did input-output plans in Russia and so forth. But the one teacher I really remember and that I actually wrote about in the book was a guy called Monroe Engel, who was English literature. And so what I really did at college was work for the school paper, the Harvard Crimson, and rarely went to class. But this class was, I don't know, 15 or 20 people. If you didn't show up, they noticed. And he took English literature, so Jane Austen, uh, I don't know, uh,
E.M.
the other,
Forster. Yes, yeah,
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 whatever.
right.
And he would take a book and just completely take it apart and show what the author had done and how it worked. And but he did it so brilliantly that he could put it back together again so you could enjoy it as a novel or a play or whatever. And I ran into him in the street close to the end of a term, and I hadn't submitted my essay or something, and I started crying. And he was so kind, and I got the essay in eventually, but just that was probably my favorite teacher of the whole 4 years. And there were a bunch of interesting ones, obviously.
So you mentioned you're working at the Harvard Crimson because you're at Harvard, and this is another funny coincidence. So many people that I've been interviewing in recent weeks for this project that become investors or go into tech or whatever started out in journalism, like Susan Line, Jerry Kalana. I'm curious if what is it about the discipline of journalism that creates people that can often end up going into so many different fields or different directions?
Well, it's something, ironically, that trains you very well to work with AI. It's about asking questions and knowing what questions to ask to go deeper. What is it that I'm not seeing? What do I still need to understand? What's the source? And if you don't ask an AI questions well, you're going to end up with slop, as everybody's discovering.
You actually do go into journalism after college, right? You go to Forbes.
Right. Yeah. I started as a fact checker back when Forbes still had fact checkers. And I mean, from the New York point of view, a year after I moved to New York, and I was a little before I started working for Forbes, I lived in an apartment building around the corner from Forbes, which was at 65th Avenue, and I was at 2 East Wall Street. I mean, it was incredibly convenient.
Do you what were you covering? Because you eventually do become a reporter. So
Yeah.
what was your beat? You start covering like tech essentially.
Well, no, it was basically, okay, you're a fact checker. You got to go fact check unless you come up with a story. And if you come up with a story, you can go report it. So I pretty quickly figured that one out. And one of, for me, again, one of the amazing experiences was I went to them and said, I'd like to write it. So there was data general, there were data, I wrote a few tech stories and found that kind of interesting. And yeah, the utility companies, not so much. And I wanted to do a story on the Japanese computer threat because that was pretty real. And I had this inkling that they would be good at hardware, but maybe not so much at software. And they said, okay, you can do that. You can represent yourself as a Forbes reporter, but you have to pay your own way
Mm.
and you have to take your own vacation time. But I thought it would be worth it. So I went, and it was an amazing trip. Yeah, I figured if I'm going to do Tokyo, I'll also do Hong Kong, where I had a friend who was a PR guy for SO, now Exxon, and he said, I know you don't really care about the oil business, Esther, but you can maybe do an interesting story on employee housing. And in the end, I didn't do the story, but it was wonderful because he was a good enough PR guy that instead of just having me go see the employee housing, he had a local person from the company first show me some housing of people who were not employees, who were, living 13 people in a little apartment and three triple decker bunk beds and a little stove in the corner, and then after that the employee housing looked amazing. Uh, in I went to Taiwan and ended up getting food poisoning, so mostly I just remember the bathroom of the hotel I was in. And Hong Kong I fell in love with and visited many times over the years and was there for the Yellow Revolution, and also spent a lot of time in Russia. So those all those things are, I love New York and I love the rest of the world. But the story about the computers, I took the head of, I think it was Fujitsu System Software, to dinner. I'm a Forbes reporter, and we sat down and I said, so I'd like to ask you about your system software business. Oh, so funny to hear a woman ask about system software. It was a kind of useless dinner, but I ended up having a cover story from it. And so that was pretty wonderful.
And then so that
And I never got paid for that, but I sure learned.
but did it lead you into coverage of tech and
Yeah,
computing?
no,
Yeah.
I mean, Data General, I
Yeah.
met Fred Adler, wrote about, I think, digital equipment, and it ended basically. I love writing these stories, but they're stories, and I want to go do something really useful and talk to people who are actually making investment decisions, and went to work on Wall Street. And that's where I really got into tech, working with Newcourt Securities, which was a it was basically the Rothschild money in New York City, and got to know the tech community. And so again, a piece of advice to people who want to know how to do stuff. I interviewed with Stephen Friedman from Goldman Sachs, who's a New Yorker par excellence, and uh, Merrill Lynch. And they both sort of said, this is really interesting. You have a good writing background. You clearly know tech, but let's face it, you don't have an MBA. So you could work in the library and assist some of our analysts. And Newcourt Securities said, uh, gee, we're looking for somebody. We need a research department to cover the companies we've invested in that are eventually going to go public. And you'd be reporting to the head of sales, who doesn't know too much, but you could learn a lot about research from the other analysts because you'll go to analyst meetings. And yeah, it was amazing because he he supported me but didn't tell me what to do. I went and learned from the other analysts, and 30 or 40 years later I was on the, believe it or not, the platform of the South Station in Boston, and this guy comes running up to me and says, Esther Dyson, you were so annoying." I said, "Who are you?" He said, "Oh, I was, an analyst for," and I don't remember who it was, but apparently I was always asking questions because I didn't know anything, but I wanted to learn. And they just thought that was incredibly annoying. Uh, so that was how I started in New York and got into tech. And then after 3 years there, the primary company was actually FedEx, which was a really interesting company that, was just dealing with automation, and they started shipping everything to Memphis because it was simple and packages didn't care. But as computers came in, they realized they could do dynamic routing and scheduling and so forth. So that was a lot of fun. Anyway, I wanted to go to a bigger firm that had a name that people knew, and I worked at Oppenheimer for 2 years, and then joined this guy called Ben Rosen, who's another stalwart of the New York tech scene, who had a newsletter called Rosen Electronics Letter. His problem in the end was he had a conflict of interest because he was also chairman of Compaq and of Lotus, which are the two signal companies of those days. We talked to Business Week, I think, and Computer World or something. And then I looked at Ben Rosen, and yeah, the Einstein of that part of my life, so to speak. But yeah, he was good looking. He'd been a VP at Morgan Stanley. He'd done the Apple IPO, and he was running this little company of 5 people. And I thought, well, I could do that. So I said, why don't you take the cash out of the business, because it was a pay ahead subscription business, and I'll take it over.
Let me stop and pause for context here. So,
Sure.
Rosen Electronic Letter is a
Yeah.
newsletter, but this is in 2025 as we're talking. It's not newsletter like a Substack newsletter. There's a long history, especially on Wall Street,
Yes.
of a very specialized literal newsletters mailed to people where it's like we might only have 200 subscribers, but if it's niche and like narrow interest enough, but people are willing to pay for it, you can create an entire business around that. So
Yes.
I want to clarify that. But then also there is a second leg to this stool, which is PC Forum, which
Right.
is essentially what we would call like a conference or an event
Yes,
business, correct?
it is. Yeah. So the newsletter started out as the Morgan Stanley Electronics Letter while he was at Morgan Stanley. Then when he left to start his own business, it became Rosen Electronics Letter. And then when I took it over, I didn't want to put my name on it, but I called it Release 1.0, which in those days was a very clever pun because it was the first release of a piece of software.
Right, right. It's using software jargon, tech jargon that at that time you would have to be in the know to even know why you would name it that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So number one, why did you want to take over the business? And then number two, when you take it over in those early days, what does success look like? Hundreds of subscribers, thousands. What does
Okay.
success feel like to you in that time?
Yeah. I took it over because I really liked writing about the business. And this was, instead of writing for investors or for customers, I was actually writing for people in the business. And he had a really great reputation. So people knew the newsletter. It had been for free to Morgan Stanley clients, which was one way Morgan Stanley would get their clients. Oh, you can read Ben's newsletter. And, I love to get one, there would be an envelope that it was inside, and there would be like a list of 30 people. I saw this at some client's office or something. First the head of, I don't know, sales had seen it, and then the vice president of sales, and then down. But it was a physical thing, and it was passed around from person to person. Amazingly, they did have copiers in those days, but whatever. And hey, I wanted to be a journalist, and this was a chance to be a really good one, as opposed to a sort of lightweight advertising sponsored business or just catering to investors. And success to me was so, you know, there was no notion of an IPO or anything like that. It was basically, hey, I really want to do this. And I love this. And this is an amazing business that I want to follow. Yeah, I had gone to Ben's conference. Speaking of tchotchkes, in addition to my cosmonaut suit, I have an ashtray from the first time I met Steve Jobs
Mm.
at Ben's PC Forum, I think in uh, 79 or 1980. And for some reason, he held it at the Playboy Club on Lake Michigan. And so Regis McKenna invites me to have drinks with Steve at the Playboy Club. And we're served Diet Cokes by a Playboy bunny. And I steal the orange ashtray from our table, which I still treasure. So it was access to the most interesting business in the world, really. I mean, in the same way that AI was, I mean, I think AI is fundamentally different for a lot of reasons, but at that point, it was really the business of the future. People needed to understand it better, and I wanted to be right in the middle of it. And so I got this seat at the edge of the table where the people were doing the work, and they would, because both Ben and I had been discreet, they would tell us stuff that we knew how to use, but not betray confidences.
Let me stick with the newsletter for a second. So, Release 1.0 became a central reading for technologists, investors. Again, this is not a perfect analogy, but today think of a Ben Thompson and Stratechery, right?
Yeah,
Walk me through your workflow on a classic Release 1.0 issue, like from the first hunch of an idea, this is what I want to write about, to like actually publishing the analysis.
it would it would vary, obviously, depending on how much of it was thinking about something, how much of it was interviewing people. Was it a new? But it was not. I mean, the newsletter was not about last week so and so announced X. Usually, it was more like this is an interesting area to look into. So I was actually writing about AI and Danny Hillis and language understanding back in the 80s. I I was writing about Brewster Kahle and Internet Archive, who I'm going to go see this evening. Uh, it would, and so I would write about what mini computers meant. Uh, I should have been better prepared, but you can actually find most of them in the Internet Archive, God bless them. And equivalent to what I did in Japan, I started getting interested in Russia. So I'd write about the Russian computer industry. Um, One of my very favorite newsletters, plus a conference, which was towards the end, was about spyware. And this is after, so this ended when CNET acquired us, which was not really my idea of success, but both Daphne, my business partner, and I wanted to move on. They, the CNET people that started this, we're going to do this conference on spyware, and either the person left or something, I don't know. And they were kind of halfway there. It's like 2 or 3 months out. And I said, so who have you got speaking yet already? And they said, well, this lady from the FTC, we've got Ben Edelman, we've got a bunch of anti-spyware companies. And I said, well, what about the spyware companies? And said, oh, they're evil. I said, well, you know, isn't the whole point of it's just like in politics now. No, you got to listen to the other side to know what's. So I did a newsletter on spyware where I interviewed 4 genuine spyware companies, and then they came and spoke sort of delicately on stage. But it really was, yeah, it wasn't quite getting the Russians and the Ukrainians together, but it was pretty wonderful. And people came up and said afterwards, I I never really listened to these people except in court, and just to hear how they think and their business models, and maybe they are kind of deluding themselves slightly, but what was fun was going in and writing stuff other people hadn't already written or discovered, or explored. So over the years, it was, you know, the rise of the internet, Yahoo, the advertising business model. One thing I learned early was business, it's not the economy, stupid, it's the business model.
Hey everybody, this is Brian cutting in here real quick. If you like the deep dives into tech history that I do on this show, you should know about my day jobs. First of all, I'm the host of the Tech Brew Ride Home podcast, part of the Morning Brew family. Every day, in 15 minutes on that show, I tell you what happened that day in the world of tech. For almost a decade, it's like I'm telling you the tech history that is happening in real time. I'd love you to check it out because that show allows me to do this show. Search Tech Brew Ride Home in your podcast app of choice. But also, I have a rolling fund, the Ride Home Fund. We invest in early stage startups, have made dozens and dozens of investments over the years. So if you're an accredited investor, you can invest alongside me in the companies making the tech history of the future. You can find out more and sign up to invest alongside me at ridehomefund.com. PC Forum earned a reputation as a room that really mattered to be in. Like I interviewed Margaret from A16Z a couple days ago, and she specifically referenced
Van Macher.
Yeah, a PC Forum event that she was at. She's like, you got to talk to Esther. I was like, by the way, it's happening in 2 days. But for gatherings like that, for conferences, for whatever, what is the key to creating an event that has a high signal to noise ratio?
Well, first of all, few speeches. It's much more interesting to have four people who are not necessarily direct competitors, but like I'm a customer, I'm a competitor. This is how I see it. The spyware thing was a wonderful example of that. Have the people who never have their side heard. Each conference should have an arc. It's not a bunch of panels, and it's especially not a bunch of speeches. There are one or two. I mean, some of the Jeff Bezos gave an amazing one just as the .com crash was happening, and nobody believed what he said. And of course, it turned out to be true. So it should be new content, and it's for the industry. It's not people pitching to their customers. I mean, obviously, there's some of that, and some of the companies sell to other companies and so forth. But it's very much it's for the people in the room. It's not. So many conferences now are really made in order to create videos. And one thing that happens is the stage is gorgeous and nobody in the room can see anything. And so as the audience, you might as well just be watching it on video. And we made a point of having the lights up unless somebody was actually showing a video, which we discouraged anyway, so that the people in the room, number one, they would ask questions. They would also be asked questions by the good speakers who the best way to engage the audience is to make, oh, is he going to call on me? And, again, it was a tight enough community that the maximum we had was 400 or 500 in the room. And it varied over the years, but everybody pretty much knew everybody in the audience. We published the attendee list. People had big badges so you could see who they were. There were just a lot of things that I'm amazed people still don't do very effectively at conferences. So it was very much not a speaker. And then, so like the first 3 years, we had a special speakers dinner the first evening. And then it was just two things happened. One, Jim Barksdale from FedEx, who later on went to run Netscape. Yeah. The FedEx guy who was bringing the badges had lost the speaker ribbons, or whatever. We didn't have the special ribbons for the speakers or something like that. And then, this speaker thing is every year we'd have to go and sort of quietly say, Steve, would you come with me to the speaker's dinner? And then there was the year that Bill Gates and Ann Winblad went off to dinner, and instead of going to the speaker's dinner, I was really annoyed. Anyway, after the first 3 years, we didn't even have a speakers dinner. It's just like if your self-esteem depends on being a speaker, eh. So it just it was it wasn't that we all loved each other, but it was a community where people knew one another and anybody in the audience could raise their hand and usually get an answer from somebody who knew who they were.
You mentioned the dot-com bubble, and we're kind of there in the chronology.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
sorry.
Well, running something like PC Forum in the '90s, how do you, or even Release 1.0, how do you continue to be credible without becoming either a cheerleader or a scold, like in periods like that?
You discover new stuff. I mean, I really, I wasn't either. I really wanted to explain how things worked, not, oh, this is good or this is bad. I mean, I'm sure I was dismissive of certain things and so forth, but I mean, I wasn't interested in good or bad. I was interested in how does this work? What's not, I'm not a big fan of predicting the future, but I really like to understand the present. And you know, why, what's the advertising model here? How are these guys going to make money? What's the what's the value of this thing or not?
Um, well, about predicting the future, one of your books, Release 2.0, I think it came out in like 1997. So it's sort of like a worldview right before the height of the dot-com mania. Like if you were to reread it today from what you can remember of it, like what did you get right or most
You
wrong
know,
about what was coming?
yeah, I I have never reread it, and but I do know. I mean, again, it was an explanation of how things worked more than this guy's ahead or that's guy's be. Hold on, and I know you can edit this
Yes,
out
I will.
anyway, but
I will.
here we go. Where is it?
Or maybe I won't.
No, here we go. Oh dear, this is. Oh, here we go. I'm just going to look at the chapters.
Mm,
I mean, the one thing I know I was way too optimistic
hmm
about people's ability to. So I'm writing this book on AI, and one of the things that's really important in the evolution of human intelligence is theory of mind. What's in this other guy's mind? Are they trying to eat me? Are they trying to steal, you know, the bone from the, I don't know, the rabbit I just killed? Are they? And theory of mind was developed long before there was money or other things. The theory of mind in business is basically business models. What is it they're after? What are they willing to give up to get what they want? Why are they looking at me that way? Why are they ignoring me? Uh, and that all goes to what are they doing with my data? Why are they showing me these funny movies and not even making me pay anything? Well, it's because they're getting something else instead. And I thought people like me were so good at explaining how this was working that people would be much more careful about their privacy and sort of understand business models, but they didn't. And I think on that, I was way over optimistic.
mm.
Okay, so here we go. Yeah, so communities, work, education. So the education one I remember because some of these chapters were pretty much issues of the newsletter that I would then turn into something more coherent for a book. The one on education, I had not written about it in the newsletter, and I wanted to talk about how you'd use AI, which already existed then, though not in the same form, to help do lesson plans and educate people and help kids to learn how to use computers. And then it was so boring I gave up on it and talked about how this whole internet stuff would help. I think that's what I did, improve the
Access to information, access to
no,
knowledge.
actually it was more about community engagement,
Mm.
PTAs, and getting the community more involved in education. I mean, again, it was probably a bit, yeah, the net can connect you to other kids. Wow. Yeah, 1997. And they can, this is about the teachers, they can use the net to communicate with your parents. Um,
Well, that's functionally true. And I want to point out that
yes,
one of the things that the internet and the web did do was allow people that to find their people, allow people to
yes.
find their
Oh, yeah.
people.
No,
Yes.
it was amazing. And but anyway, education, governance, intellectual property, that was an interesting one. Um, I there's so much. I was on the board of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I don't think content should be free, but I do think it can be free, and it's a contract. It's not. Yes, you have the right to control the use of your content, but you can't control what other people will pay you. And if you really want it to be spread widely, like, as I'd much rather have people read my stuff than pay me money in the end. And content control, yeah. So it was, I mean, in retrospect, it was a fair amount about governance and what the business model should be rather than, what's the hottest model of computer or something.
Okay, you mentioned governance, so that's my seg to ask you about being the founding chair of Icon in
Ah,
yes, in
okay.
around '98, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
98 to 2000.
Now, I think it's well documented that there were some struggles at that point. Looking back on that now, number one, what do you think you all got right or wrong at that
Okay,
point that has lasted?
right. Um, and for what it's worth, it's a perfect example of learning but not earning. And it's informed a lot of what I think about certain things. So first of all, it was it was born in a sort of form of original sin, in the sense that it was really, so the US government had this thing that had been DARPANet that became the internet, and it was a non-profit sort of owned by DARPANet, and it was the bowels of the internet with all these IP addresses and stuff that were basically just numbers of where things were, like a giant card filing system for websites. And it was run by this guy called John Postel, who was a scientist with hair down to basically the bottom of his back. And there was some fight about something or other, and he shut down one of the servers for 3 days. And it's like, oh my God, we really need to. This thing is actually going to be kind of big. We'd better figure out how to manage it better. And the the U.S. government, being kind of sensible, said, we actually would like this not to be controlled by us. We think it should be controlled by the internet community. And the original sin was, then they said, we're going to make it happen. And we're going to pretend it was the internet community, because the internet community was not very coherent then or ever. And they got the EU involved because the EU had probably the second biggest chunk of compute around. Eventually, they brought in Japan. And so, meanwhile, there was a lot of the government's trying to give the internet away. The business people said it's working, just don't mess with it. The freedom people said you need to have the internet people have control. And John Postel was kind of a unifying figure, at least in the internet community. And then, as this thing was beginning to happen, he went in for heart surgery and died of complications in a way that was completely not suspicious, but very unfortunate. I got called in by Ira Magaziner because they were looking for somebody who sort of knew something but wasn't really aligned with anything, because again, I was a journalist. That was the whole point. And the board included Vince Cerf, who I was actually on a Zoom with earlier today, and who was the obvious choice, but didn't want to take on probably the burden and the politics. So, we show up at our first board meeting in November of, I guess, 1999, 1989, 1998 to
90,
1997,
97,
or
yes.
97,
At
yeah.
least according to my
And
notes. So, yes.
yes, yeah, no, that's about right. I mean, that's all recorded. So instead of John Postel and sort of the internet, whatever, there was Jones Day, the law firm, that kind of set the scene for this thing. Because, I knew enough about the industry, but I didn't know about the legal complexities. And our first mission was to basically undo the monopoly of Network Solutions, which was owned by, I think, VeriSign. Again, facts are available. And that was a big battle. But the government didn't want to look as if they were controlling things. So we had a very limited budget. And Jones Day, the law firm, said, you should certainly have your board meetings in private, which caused a lot of angst everywhere. And then our Dutch board member, in some interview or something, said, it's a really stupid thing, because if we hold open board meetings, we'll just decide everything at dinner the night before. Let's get real. Which of course was totally true. And but we got off to a very rocky start, and their Network Solutions, one way or another, was finding trolls to just spread rumors and angst and so forth. And we did try to reach out to the so way too much information here. What fundamentally happened was we got the thing going. It sort of worked. We changed. We created a competitive marketplace of registries and registrars, and then there was the .org registry, which was being managed by ISOC, which came up in the news 3 or 4 years ago when they tried to sell it. And so I got re-involved. But there were really two missions. One was to make sure that the internet was not controlled by governments very closely. The IT, International Telecom Authority, or somebody was trying to, ITU, International Telecoms Union, thought they should do it. And we managed to sort of get the governments involved, but they were the government advisory committee. They didn't control stuff. And the other one was, of course, to help create and regulate a honest free market for domain names. We did the first, I think, pretty well. The second we failed at. And it basically became a protection racket, which it is now. And we also we didn't go after fraud effectively enough. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of scammers using fake domain names. There's lots of other ways to commit fraud on the internet too. But even the domain name system ended up not being as trustworthy as it should be. And it was also, you know, nice, nice Coca-Cola. That's a nice trademark you got there. Wouldn't it be pity if something happened to it? And we can help you protect Coca-Cola.com, but now we're going to sell Coca-Cola.info and Coca-Cola.sweet and Coca-Cola.diet to the first comer unless you buy them all. And so, they just kept basically inflating the currency of a domain name. So if you wanted really to own a domain name with your trademark, I mean, there was some trademark protection, but if you had something like, I don't know, sweet pies or something, there was no way you could own that unless you bought hundreds of hundreds of TLDs. And so somebody came up to me recently and said, "Is ICANN a model for governing AI?" I said, "No way."
Uh,
Anyway, I hope that's sort of what you were
no,
looking
yeah,
for.
definitely. And again, we are going to get to the AI stuff. I promise before we're done here.
Yeah, no, no, no
Let
rush.
let me do a hard left turn because we've
Yeah,
skipped over something, which is I believe in the early '90s you begin angel investing, and you've been an investor throughout your entire career. There's kind of a dumb term, but like, did you ever have an investment thesis in terms
no.
of then?
If
You go ahead.
you need an investment thesis if you're investing other people's money, both so that they know what you're buying, you know what you're promising. If it's your own money, you don't need to apologize to anybody for, as I said, always make new mistakes that emerge. So do my investment theses. I mean, it's if obviously I need to like the person, I've made some mistakes there. You need to, I will invest in something that may or may not be successful because I know I will learn. And I would say my best example of that was 23andMe, from which I learned a huge amount, but did not get paid out. Uh, and I mean, I still own some shares that are trading, and I'm not sure what's happening. But so I guess in a way, my investment thesis is the following. It's another one of my favorite sayings. If I was a maid, I would want a dirty room.
What does that
In other
mean?
words,
Yeah.
I want to fix things. I want things to work better. I want to clean up, not clean up like grab the money, but just I'm the kind of annoying person who will go and, you know, move your pictures around so that you're straight and fold the towels or whatever. I have no interest in stuff that's I at one end I think things like Robinhood and basically addictive gambling are really, really bad. Then there's stuff, I have no objection if people buy stuffed teddy bears or Lulu, whatever's, but I have no interest in investing in that business. I like to invest in things that are basically useful and not redundant. I prefer implementation over innovation any day. Like don't just be creative and innovative, actually make the thing work. And FedEx was an example, right? Wonderful company. They did something useful. They did it innovatively. They did it better. They were clever, and so forth.
I want to poke at something that you said to the degree you want to go into it.
Sure.
What would what would the lesson be, the takeaway from the 23andMe experience?
Oh, I learned a ton about genetics. I mean, it's
That's
yeah,
worthwhile.
yeah, and but I mean, it got me into rooms where, oh, she knows about genetics. It's a fundamentally very. I ended up being the number three person for the Personal Genome Project, which was a much more scientific thing. Yeah, I mean, it's not just lessons learned. What do you? It's kind of. I mean, again, it's like going to Tokyo or something. It's it's not. Oh, I learned X about Japan. It's I got into Japan, and this is the whole thing about AI. To understand anything, it's a lot more than just a logic model. Just being immersed in a particular. Oh, here's a great example. So there is a company in Sri Lanka that made still makes women's underwear. You know, if you've ever seen a production line with brassieres, it's amusing. They were moving into sort of intelligent clothing or wearables and stuff, and basically the offer. I invested. I think I invested. I joined their advisory board. I mean, I don't actually know what I've done a lot of things, so forgive me if
No, no worries.
I don't. I want to get my facts right. But anyway, I got involved in that basically to get a couple of round trips to Sri Lanka and the ability to visit a local underwear factory. And I took I took an extra day on either side and went to visit a local dissident, and you know that that's how I like to travel, not the fancy hotel and the museum. And there's so much, the world is so interesting.
Okay. Uh, Allows me to pivot into Eastern Europe. You did a lot of investing, a lot of events,
Right.
even newsletters about Eastern Europe and tech. Are you, how gratified are you to see the degree to which that region is, at least in 2025, integrated into the modern tech ecosystem,
Yeah.
especially for talent?
Yeah. So, first of all, just there is a very clear and to me important narrative arc there. I went for the first time in 1989 with, and yeah, a whole nother podcast, but and was so fascinated with the place. I started a second newsletter called Rel East and began to go not just to Russia, where I'd learned Russian in high school, part of the, you know, physicist father, Russian neighbors, blah, blah, blah. Uh, so I started going to Eastern Europe as well. And we did conferences for about 10 years, I think, starting out with one in Budapest in 1981, probably. I mean, 1991. And because I'm a journalist, I wasn't investing at that point. So I did not actually start investing in the US until the 2000s. Uh, so about 2 or 3 years in, this guy, Lee Keat from Vanguard Atlantic, said to me, you keep talking. Yeah, we were getting the East and the West together and having the Easterners would come for free and the Westerners would pay, I think, $4,000 or $5,000, which was quite a lot. But the theory and the practice was they were basically paying for the Easterners that they were interested in meeting. And Lee Keat said, so you keep talking about how these companies should invest in Eastern Europe. Suppose, what about you? Why don't you invest in Eastern Europe? Suppose I gave you $1 million. Would you? And so, oh no, I can't. How much did you say? And because in Eastern Europe, $1 million in the 90s went a long way. And so I ended up starting Adventure Ventures and we continued the conference, but I stopped writing the newsletter. And it was like, oh, I could, if I run a conference and people think I'm going to give them money, they'll still talk to me. And for me, the real point was, again, watching this community develop. I didn't, writing the newsletter was a lot of work. It was also free, so there was no business reason to continue it. And so I started investing in Eastern Europe long before I started in the US.
Um, do you have a hard out? Because we're almost done with our hour, but if you've got another 15 minutes, I don't want to stop.
Um, yeah, let's keep.
Oh,
I mean, it's this thing with Brewster Kahle. I just need to get in the subway, and
okay.
yeah,
I'm gonna go as fast as I can.
yeah. No, don't. I mean, I
Let,
this will last a bit longer than the 10 minutes I might miss this evening.
okay. Then listen. Um, okay, in the 2010s ish, you pivot into like health and health tech, and let me give time to that. With let's specifically do Wellville, which Wellville recently shut down like a year or two ago, maybe.
And this is why I'm writing my book,
Okay.
because originally it was a 5-year project. It was never a foundation or, the whole idea was what we want to do is to make ourselves unneeded.
Mm.
We don't want to make people dependent on us. We want to help them. So it wasn't, oh, we're going to give you fish. It wasn't even, we're going to teach you how to fish. It was, we want to help you build your own fishing schools. And then you own them because you're going to build them. We're not going to make them for you. And originally it was 5 years. We realized it would actually take a bit more than that. So it became 10 years and it ended almost on time, December 42nd of this year. I mean, of last year. And so last summer, people were saying exactly, well, it's shutting down. I'm sort of awkward. I don't want to ask, but what happened? Yeah, it was supposed to. And then you had Jimmy Carter who died. And it's like, no, that's not a tragedy. The guy had a wonderful life. what was a tragedy was Biden refusing to resign. And then there was, again, all these AI dudes, eternal life, immortality, exponential growth. Oscar Wilde, a century ago, had a play in which he talked about somebody who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. And I kept thinking about term limits, and that's the name of my book about AI. Humans have term limits, they're finite, and that's good. But what does that mean in a world where there's this obsession with immortality, with the price of everything, the value of nothing? And, you know, so the whole book is looking, I like to call it couples counseling for humans and AI. It's not the other thing. It's like addiction. It's your relationship with that thing. Things that can be good can become addictive if you succeed power to them in some form or other.
Okay. We've talked about AI enough and put it off enough that we can't do it anymore. Your,
Yeah.
your your father Freeman Dyson, I researched videos of him being on
Yeah.
record about being skeptical that digital computing would ever lead to true AI. Like
Yeah.
he thought an analog approach or like a hybrid analog digital approach would
Yeah.
would get us there. Um, do you think what do you think your father would think about how AI has actually surfaced into the mainstream?
Okay. So just if you really want to explore this topic, the person you should go to is his son and my brother, who is the Mycroft Holmes, in a sense,
Yes.
the smarter brother who's not quite as noisy.
Hmm.
And he wrote a book called Analogia a year or two ago that really deserves more.
All right.
The basic idea is at some point, digital, especially if it goes quantum and everything, becomes so complex that it actually becomes analog again. And so, I can't speculate, or I wouldn't, whatever. I think if you ask my father, or if he asked me to answer for him,
Well,
it's
what
like,
what if the better way to do it is are you surprised by how AI has entered the mainstream?
surprise, no, but that's because I don't sit around predicting things so that I can be proved wrong. It's, I mean, I've been watching, since Marvin Minsky came to PC Forum, and first 15 minutes of his talk were great. Second 15 minutes were, okay, guy, term limits maybe. Then they started throwing dinner rolls at him. Um, but he was a wonderful guy. The So I think it's totally in the realm of possibility that one way or another, we're going to be superseded by some artificially intelligent thing that is not just artificially intelligent, but also has sentience and theory of mind and all the other stuff we talked about. And it may be electronic, because I always like the science fiction story where the two Borgs look down on Earth and say, "This is so weird. I mean, we're here, we're smart, but these things, they think with their meat. They've got clumps of meat." And so I don't know, but for the immediate future, I think the notion of sentience and, there's such a difference between, you can be intelligent. The faster you run your computer, the more compute power you have, the more intelligent, the more problems you can solve, the faster you can explore all these alternatives. But the collection of experience in a way that's connected much more viscerally, I think is still pretty far off. What I'm much more scared about is the business models and the people who should be accountable for them. Oh, I didn't know that was happening. And this notion of we're going to regulate the algorithms, it's those things are just too easy to get around. I personally think it has a lot more to do with liability insurance and using insurance inspectors who actually have money on the line rather than somebody who's looking at a government checklist. That's what happened with fire insurance. And a building inspector doesn't just have a checklist. They also see the oily rags on the ground. They see somebody putting a wedge in a doorway so that it's open when it should be closed. And they have money in the game. So, I mean, the business model is good. If we don't inspect this carefully, we're going to be out billions of dollars. And then you have regulations about disclosure of how much you paid for your insurance, or, oh, we couldn't get insurance. Well, you can't get insurance. Insurance companies should be known by the customers they turn down.
Some would say the same thing about investors too, but okay, I told you we were gonna come back to the cosmonaut suit, but let me squeeze this in real quick.
Sure.
Can you tell me the story of becoming an investor in SpaceX?
Oh, in SpaceX,
Mm-hmm.
I it was basically through an intermediary. The story, the more interesting one is Space Adventures,
Mm,
which is the company that basically is a tourist agency that Dennis Tito, Anusha Ansari, the the famous space tourist before it became. I mean, these guys actually went to the space station. They didn't go into low Earth orbit and come back after 10 minutes
right.
like Lauren Sanchez et al. So that, I guess I met them, because my dad was involved with this whole stuff and actually helped to build a rocket called the Orion, which my brother also wrote a nice book about. As a kid, I thought, well, someone's taking care of that. And then in the sort of the would have been the early 2000s, I think, I began to get more interested in space, and it's not happening the way it should, and decided to run an additional conference called Flight School, where we had my father among other people, and uh, anyway, so I invested in them, and also in Zero G, which I wrote in quite a few times. That was a lot of fun, and they eventually bought one another. So Space Adventures, they kept saying, well, Esther, it's only 20, 30 million. Why don't you do this? I don't have the money and I'm kind of busy. Well, you could at least train.
Mm,
And then what actually happened was I'd been getting more interested in healthcare, and but I still didn't have a center of gravity. One of my sisters, who this turned out well, or I wouldn't tell you this story, but she had breast cancer and had a mastectomy. And when she told, she called and told me, and I cried. And about a month or two later, I was trying to set up some meetings, and there was a conflict. And I thought, oh, if I just had breast cancer, I could cancel. What? I mean, as I said, decisions emerge. I said, if you think breast cancer is a good solution to a busy schedule, something's wrong. And I got in touch with the Space Adventures people and said, yeah, I'm ready to be a backup. I'll train. And the deal was you would pay much less to be a backup, but if you actually went, you'd have to pay a negotiable amount. If it was 5 months in advance, they could find somebody else. If it was a month or two in advance, well, you had a pretty good bargaining position because they didn't want the seat to go empty. That never happened to me. It is what happened to Anusha Ansari. So anyway, I signed up and went to tell my parents, invited them to lunch. And you've probably gotten by now, I have an interesting life. I do what I like. And my parents were always, oh yeah, that's great. Go and live with your boyfriend in Morocco. We won't come pick you up if you end up in jail, but we wish you well, and you know, go be a journalist. Yeah, go to China, Russia, whatever. And this time my dad got up and came around and hugged me, and I realized, oh yeah, I'm his firstborn, and this is what he was dreaming of ever since he was 6 years old. It's so long story that I'll make very short. My father, my stepmother, my brother came to not to well, came to Moscow eventually, but they came to Baikonur in Kazakhstan, where the launch that I wasn't on, where Charles Simoni, which is who I was backing up,
Right.
and that was just wonderful.
Well, you alighted over something. Didn't you go to Star City and train for a full 6 months?
Oh yeah, yeah. I trained for 6 months. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
was there,
Yeah.
and my Russian got much better, as you can imagine,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh,
that's a whole nother podcast.
listen, we might have to do another one. But okay, we got to close the loop. You said about the cosmonaut suit,
Oh yes,
the one that you didn't get, or the one that you bribed something. So please tell me that
yeah.
story. Yes.
So I mean, it was a wonderful 6 months. That you can't do this stuff and not learn a ton. And there's lots of preparations. You have to go get your seat. And if I don't know if you take pictures, but if you go to Flickr, I have a whole lot of stuff about the training.
By the
And
way, I highly recommend looking her up on Flickr because she has a lifetime of all of the stuff that we've been talking about on Flickr.
yeah, um, so you go into this sort of pot of still liquid plaster of Paris so that they can get your form to build a space, a space seat, a seat on the spacecraft, and then you have to get fitted for the space suit and all this stuff. And so we'd gone out to this place and come back at the end of a long day, and I rushed into my basically the dorm, and was up in my room, which had no lock, and in the bathroom. And there's a knock on the door, and it's the guy who runs this part of the business. And he says, "Here, you forgot your shapka, your little, you know, woolen hat in the car." And and I'm trying to button up my jeans, and he says, "And oh, by the way, you have to pay $100,000 to buy your spacesuit, but actually it goes through quite a few hands before it gets to you, and I could kind of intercept this process and get it for you for, I don't remember, but like I was 40 or 50,000."
Cheap, a deal.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I mean, and he would get a bigger cut of a smaller amount, whatever. And I said, "Look, just talk to me later." And he never actually approached me again. But my basic thinking there was, I'd much rather have a good story than
Yeah, but
pay so many.
you could have two cosmonaut suits at this point. So maybe maybe
Well, I still have my flight
right,
suits,
right.
which are basically the ones that are just, cotton. And there's a nice story there too, because I think it was the same guy. Anyway, they would always look at me and say, "Oh, we've never had anybody quite so small here, and nothing fits you." And he said he knew this lady who would be perfect. And it turned out she was his wife, who mostly ran a bridal salon and did wedding dresses. So she came to turn up the hems of my flight suit as opposed to my spacesuit. And she put there was a real spacesuit there sitting around somewhere, and she put some needles carefully horizontally on this spacesuit. But just the mere presence of a needle near this supposedly airtight spacesuit made everybody in the room jump. And anyway, there were so many wonderful, funny moments.
Esther, we might have to talk again if you're willing. The door is always open because you mentioned
Sure.
Flickr. You were an investor in Flickr. Delicious Meetup. There's
Yes.
we could go. I'd love to learn stories
Yeah.
about all these things. But
Oh yeah, Meetup especially, because that's a real New York story.
let's end with this, which is
Okay.
you have a book coming out soonish. We hope. What I believe called Term Limits: A Design for Living in the Age of AI.
No, I mean, who knows what it'll be called in the
Okay,
end, but right now it's Term Limits, Time and Scale in the Age of AI. It was going to be Living in the Age of AI, but in the end,
got it.
it
We don't know the date yet, though. So I mean, this will come out maybe within a month. So
oh yeah, it's going to be probably a year
Okay.
at least.
Well,
Yeah.
be on the
No, I mean,
lookout.
do another podcast before
Okay.
that.
Oh, that's a perfect excuse. Now you have an excuse to
Yes.
talk to me again. All right.
Okay,
Esther, thank
great.
you so much for coming on and remembering all that for us.
Thank you. And good luck editing this.